All right. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so this one's super exciting. I'm going to try to keep myself from geeking out too much right now. I'm here with Erik Medina. You are animation director right now at Amazon Game Studios.
That's right. Yep.
Fantastic. But what we're doing is we're going to be looking at Mark of Kri, a PS2 amazing thing. And on this, you had multiple titles on this game.
I did. I was lucky enough to be animation lead, cinematic director, and game designer.
That's awesome. Okay.
A lot of work.
Yeah. So how about you set it up, right? Like I think 2002 is what the credits said when we first booted it up. So if you want to kind of set up what the game is, and then we can maybe check a cinematic, and then we'll go into gameplay.
Yeah, it was 2002, although it started earlier, probably around 2000. And what you probably won't know when you're playing it is that this actually stemmed from a game just before this, where I actually helped kind of design a combat system. That game never made it, never saw the light of day, but it was the seed that ended up kind of spurring what you ended up seeing in the Mark of Kri. It was a cool little quick game that kind of threw us into PS2, and that's what this was, like a PS2 launch title for us at the time, anyways. This is the first thing I got to say, though. I'm looking at this, and the first thing that hits me is the fact it reminds me of how great our team was. Our team was built up of a lot of 2D animators, myself included, and we were fresh into games. Games were kind of bringing 2D guys over for the first time. And we were dying to bring some of the look and style of our, skill set to a subject matter that people were a little scared of or a little, afraid of us doing a kind of adult-themed content, but with this kind of Disney-ish look. So it was a great team that kind of made us and supported us kind of thinking out of the box a little bit. So the whole game was just absolutely a bunch of 2D guys having fun.
So inspiring. Yeah. All right. So let's show them. I mean, first off, the personality and character on that. I remember when I first saw this, I was like, oh, I haven't seen this much personality and character in a game before in so many ways, and yeah. So let's check on some.
You want work, huh? I don't know. Business has been slow lately, boy. People tell me bandits have made our neighboring forest their home. Anyone trying to get here is being robbed, or worse. It's made Bamusu nervous. He thinks it's the beginning of dark times. I think they just need a good kicking before they'll move on to someone else's forest. Bamusu tells me you've become pretty good with that sword of yours. Maybe you could... Well, maybe I've got some other work around here you could do. How about washing down some tables for me, or mopping the floor? Well, maybe you can help Tati clean dishes, or sweep up, or pick up her after her. She's kind of a mess herself. People keep flushing foreign objects down the toilet.
Yeah, you can see like in the those little like head turns, all that stuff feels so 2D inspired.
I can't tell you how 2D it was. It's super 2D. I think a lot of us are still drawing a lot of this stuff before we were animating it at the time. But it's funny to see it now because the fidelity is so low, and it's so low poly, and we didn't have a lot to work with, obviously, but it didn't stop us from trying to at least get to those places. And I think a lot of the time I was, kind of pushing the team to not, I guess, release or lose that kind of 2D aesthetic and not switch to a 3D style of animation.
Yeah.
So we were trying to retain some of that look, even though we had really very little to work with, poly-wise and or animation-wise, to be honest.
I think that's why the personality comes through so much, and that's available. All right, so we're gonna go back out of this. We're just gonna start. I'll start playing the game.
Yeah.
And you can just sort of talk about stuff. Chat as you have questions. Like always, let us know. We're going to get paper airplanes with said questions. And yeah, so let's go. I'm going to put the mic down and play and try to not totally embarrass myself.
So, I mean, first and foremost, just as I see this stuff, you guys, if whoever has played the game or seen it, there's an artist behind the game that was our creative kind of lead and concept lead. His name was Jeff Merkhart. He was kind of the one guy we styled the whole game after. His art style was kind of the driving look. He was the filter, and we kind of ran everything through him. He kind of drew over it. and he's the one that actually drew all the kind of transitions and all the kind of 2D little storyboard cinematics. Really awesome, and obviously influenced the game immensely. And he kind of, his touch is all over this.
Yeah, it's so. I'm gonna go back here. I think this is how I start this mission. We're gonna try. All right, here we go.
Rao, you look troubled. Allow me to read your fortune. Blizzard, give me your hand. You have just returned from a journey. You entered the Hayadoko forest and lived to tell. Few have done this. Young man, you have been tricked. The gold you were recently given is hexed. These coins bear the mark of the Kosai. Avoid this sign. It is evil. Where did you get such coins? I cannot see the one who paid you. He has the ability to hide from my vision. Be careful, Rao. The giver of these coins has great power. You have help, though. You have a familiar. The bird called Kuso. Good. He is your spirit guide sent from the gods to watch over you. Use him and trust his vision.
Is that a different in-game model there than the?
No, that's actually the exact same model that I have on the desk there.
Oh, okay.
It's literally the same Geo from the game.
Okay.
It's something we actually had printed out. And it was somewhere we actually checked some of the edge loops and some of the forms. Since we had very little fidelity to go with, we actually put extra attention to the way the Geo was kind of laid out so that the form had some flow before we actually touched the animation. We weren't doing any other kind of posing that was fancy. We just had skeletons to tweak. So we knew that going in, the edges needed to have kind of a flow before animators even touched it. So printing it out actually helped us check to see if the flow existed before we actually went in.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
no, I love that.
It's a lo-fi solution for not having the ability to actually pose the character.
Yeah.
But we didn't have a lot of polys, so.
All right, so let me, I think, put this down.
Yeah, put it down.
There we go.
Yeah, I mean, you're looking at, this hub and all this area. It totally came across. It was founded out of these drawings here. These are just actual sketches. We actually just captured him drawing. The solution was us working backwards from not having enough money to make real full-blown cinematics, and we loved the artwork of it. So what we ended up coming up with as a cheaper solution, but also I think a more appropriate solution for the storytelling, was to actually have 2 or 3 passes of the Geo. We would actually design the levels, then we would stage them, frame them, and then we would give these shots here back to Jeff Merkhart, and he would then kind of sketch it. And then we had this kind of workflow through the whole game, so that's how we got all these seamless transitions. So they were actually coming from screenshots, but they originated as concept arts, but really, it was really a back and forth. But it was a good, clever solution for not having, honestly, a huge budget, but wanting to at least keep some of our roots in the game, which are all the 2D drawings.
That's a perfect segue. Ashtrail Llama asked, what was the joint budget for the game, actually?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it wasn't a lot. I actually don't remember exactly, but I would say that you can probably see all of them. There's nothing hidden there. There wasn't any joints that were assisting any deformations, and there was nothing tricky. It was actually really, really low. This game actually came off the heels for us internally we had just previously done a different game that had huge restrictions. We were animating at like 20 frames a second, and we were running into all kinds of problems, not having really great keys and not really having powerful poses. So this was the first time we actually got to animate at, I think it was 25 frames a second. We were super excited. And we still had to do animation tricks to at least make it work. I mean, see if you get killed.
I remember, I think we saw it later at the beginning. Like, the things that I remember when I first saw this game, played it, were like putting your sword away
Yeah.
before you jump up to climb a thing, and the weight of that, and then pulling it all out. How did you sort of like work with design to do that, right? Because normally now it's like, no, as soon as you want to do a thing, make it happen, hide the weapon, whatever, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, luckily, for better or for worse, I was holding two positions on the game. I was game designer and animation lead. So the good part about that is I was able to be pretty influential on how the game was going to play. So it meant that I was kind of facilitating a lot of animation and a lot of animation time and style. You're looking at probably the first time anybody back then had even seen kind of tandem animations and that kind of soft selection that you just did. It was completely made up by us. We were totally thinking out of the box. If a good explanation, and I'd love to go into this a little more when you get into some of the other characters, but aesthetically, I always wanted the animation to feel dramatic, obviously. But as animators, we were storytellers, and I knew that in storytelling, the only way you can actually tell a real story is if the camera's kind of going along with you. You don't want the character and the camera to be kind of off. So the situation with this case in particular was if we were going to set up a combat system, I wanted to make sure that the camera was first and foremost in how we developed the system and how we actually animated the characters. And in this case, the camera itself was at the ground level of the combat system, which is something that I was firmly creating in this game. And a bit of trivia, at least for you, if, the actual inspiration for the combat system day one came from two places. A Robert Rodriguez movie, which was Desperado, which doesn't make a lot of sense when you see it, but that's truly the inspiration. And it was mainly there was a fight scene in the movie that had a Steadicam. And that Steadicam influenced me in a way that back then that made it really important that the camera play a part in the combat and not just be a secondary kind of character or something that gets added on later. So we literally developed the entire combat system around camera work. The other inspiration was Fantavision. If you remember a game called Fantavision, it had nothing to do with characters. It was actually a fireworks game. But those two inspirations kind of led us to this combat system, which ended up being really something nobody had seen before, and it was truly to facilitate some of the visuals and to increase timing.
Yeah, I think it's like I hadn't played this in a bunch of years, and going back and kind of playing again, knowing that we'd be doing this, I can see a lot of ways where this almost feels like it's a little bit of a. You can see the sort of organic through line that like this to now newer systems like what might be in the Arkham games and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You can't help but think that there might have been some influence there, and looking at that because there is such a sort of awareness of the enemies, trying to be able to react to all of them, and it's really special.
I mean, it'd be nice. I could only hope that some of these games were influenced. I mean, that'd be cool. Either way, I know that what we were doing was kind of thought of as super bizarre at the time. The actual whole creation of the animation on this came from me sitting in a room and actually just moving boxes around. And the idea was to just kind of parade the boxes in circles and having the main player just kind of do a tag game. And the situation was one box would just play tag with all these surrounding boxes. That was the timing inspiration for me, which ended up being a rhythm inspiration. So I settled the rhythm and the timing via just boxes and circle in a arena, and then moved into animation holistically after that and started kind of attacking it, which is kind of a bizarre way of working.
Can you? So I've now gone into the mode to Kuzu.
Yeah.
Can you kind of talk about what the process was there? How you guys came about to do this?
Yeah, actually, so stealth gameplay is obviously a big part of the game. We started early on developing a lot of these levels and knowing that it was all going to be stealth gameplay. We actually didn't have a bird. We were just doing stealth play via cover and using cover as you would in any other stealth game. But quickly we realized that a lot of the gameplay was coming from knowing what was ahead and being able to make decisions and allowing the player to actually make those choices themselves. So we introduced Kuzo because we always had this visual that Jeff Merkert had drawn that was a bird sitting on his arm, but we never really integrated it into the design. But the minute we knew we needed to be able to look ahead and allow the player the freedom to kind of make choices and kind of plan their approach, we knew, well, the bird was going to be the natural kind of connection for that. So we ended up putting it in, and it made a big improvement to how you approach some of these scenarios. It's not as good when you're talking over it, but if you're immersed in it, it feels way better because you're kind of digesting the scene and digesting the mood, which was a big part of the game for us anyways. That's cool. It's great to see it again.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember where it's been a while.
Yeah.
All right, we're just gonna get out of there and run around. See, I'm trying to do my best stealth. That was it. Like you were saying, doing these sort of synced actions.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't like what. I mean, this was before God of War.
Oh, totally before God of War. Yeah, it was 2000. There was nothing like it. It was actually a super simple lo-fi solution on the synced actions. I actually, me and a programmer sat down. We created an attached joint, which is pretty common nowadays. And then these two attached joints were kind of drawn to each other. And we synced the two animations up whenever you executed a combo. And then, like everything else in this game, there's a huge camera system running underneath it. Because like I said before, as an animator, storytelling is kind of everything. And for me, if I wasn't framing it correctly, it wasn't really telling the full story. So the camera gets kicked off all kinds of ways in all kinds of places. Super buggy because we didn't have a lot of tech or a lot of time back then. But the camera is very alive in this game. I spent a lot of time dealing with camera and poses. Animations were saved off with all unique cameras. There was custom cameras in areas. There was cameras that came along with the combat system. Yeah, there was a lot of complexity there. That for a game back then, it was pretty crazy. But again, like I said, we were just thinking out of the box. Like I knew I wanted the visuals to be holistic, camera, character, mood, environment. It had to be kind of one experience. So.
Deaths are so long.
They're
Like
over the top.
there are some that I know where it seems like it goes on for it feels like half a second where they're just like pulling themselves along the ground.
We were ridiculous about the deaths for sure.
Yeah.
But we were having fun. I think the game, from beginning to end, shows it. Like we didn't really have a lot of rules. We were just kind of trying to have a good time. And to be honest, at the time when I was there as an animator and Jeff Markart was there and a lot of the guys were there coming right out of 2D, there was a lot of people that were like, oh, you can't do that, you can't do this, you can't do that. And we used to get a lot of that. And we were like, okay, well, I think we can. And luckily, the studio kind of supported us in just kind of bucking everything. We were saying, oh, wait, this art style can have violence, so we added violence. Oh, you don't want the animations to be long, so we were like, we're going to make them long. The key was keeping me as part of the design group ended up facilitating the gameplay so that we never kind of stomped on each other. And that was kind of the fun part of it. Our studio was pretty good in that respect. They really wanted us to explore these kind of new techniques. And in this case in particular, it kind of paid off at the time.
Yeah. My bow skills are not what they should be.
They're better than mine.
So one of the, I'm sure this became super frustrating to certain players, but one of the things I loved was that if you hit weapons against certain objects, you would actually pay for it, right?
You would pay for it. Yeah, there was a big, that wasn't originally the plan. We actually were just swinging, and because our animations were so broad and we were just so wild, having so much fun, it was really clear and apparent that we were going through all the geo and it was looking kind of funny. And back then, it's not like we could do a lot of checks, so it was actually a big deal for us to detect a couple of different materials and have just a couple of animations that kind of said, okay, you're going to rebound off of this or you're actually going to stick. And really, that's all we did. And the sticking was important because if you played the game back then, the combat was really fluid and you could actually take out a lot of guys at once. We needed to actually gate the player and actually hold them back. They were a little too destructive sometimes. So hitting the walls and hitting the trees was actually slowing them down.
Yeah, and it gave some really great encounters. I remember, like, I think at an earlier level where there's like you're kind of in a forest with a bunch of trees all around you.
Yeah.
And it's not just, it's like, oh, there's a few enemies. Now it's like, oh, how am I going to get these guys to an area where there isn't trees that I can actually start doing stuff, or I need to be really conscious about stealthing right now, or else this is going to go very poorly.
Yeah. I mean, you totally hit on levels that were made just because the combat system works so well. Because we started from cubes, I was able to set up pretty easily a bunch of animations that could easily link up between each other. The AI underneath was actually pretty simple and straightforward. what people didn't realize at the time was the enemies aren't just standing around. They were actually running to get into their places to die. So the entire game was set up so that the enemies run to these locations so that the player can actually kill them. So the production approach for me was, I'm going to make this combat system that's absolutely perfect. I can't go wrong. I'm just going to make it so I can kill absolutely everybody and nobody can actually kill me, meaning the AI.
Sure.
Once I knew that was working, then I just started tuning that out and then use that as tuning levels. It was much easier than trying to control what the AI was doing. Instead, I just choreographed almost the entire situation. So luckily, that's a little bit of a facade. You can't see that. You can't see that all those guys are doing is just getting in a position to die, but it worked out really well.
All right, so I'm going to try and just do a terrible job at stealthing, more so than already, and try and get a bunch of guys around me to show off that combat that you were talking about.
Yeah. Unless you have a cheat code, but I don't have one.
I think there must be a cheat code in because I've gotten hit a lot and I haven't taken any damage.
Oh, the monkeys.
Oh yeah, there's like a lot of environmental creatures that will give you away.
Yep, it was totally part of the design. The environment stuff was, there was a couple of guys working on the design with the environment, and they really worked hard in making sure that these levels were like tuned when it came to like a scenario and whether or not you could disturb the enemy. So there's the whole kind of enemies running around. They seem kind of sporadic, like they don't know what they're doing, but they are truly kind of just getting into position to die. It's hilarious. So the selection system was actually a game in itself. It was actually really important for us to do that. I should explain why we even did it, because I think a lot of people back in the day said, why do you have this beam shooting out around the character? And it is a little unorthodox, but what it did in this case, and you can kind of see it here, is we actually removed all the controls, the navigation controls, the minute you locked all the characters. So if I could remove all the navigation controls, then I could free the camera to do whatever the hell I thought was cool. So the aesthetic nature of it was a driving force to creating that lock-on. The other thing behind it was that we were able to actually assign these buttons to these characters, which allowed us to put depth into the combat. The initial thoughts of the combat system were it was going to be real simple, but we realized it was really shallow. So immediately we said, well, we want it to be super approachable to every single person that just picks it up. They feel awesome, but we wanted major depth. We wanted it to like be full of combos and exploration and discovery and complexity. So in the game, right, you select, you assign those buttons. The more buttons you assign, the less combo freedom you have, but it comes with benefits. So if you just select one guy, you have more combos available, but it's very difficult to attack guys that aren't selected. So it was kind of a balance trick. You could either use up all your slots or not use up all your slots, and you had pros and cons if you chose either way. Super complex for trying to at least just capture some great visuals, but I think at the end of the day, they both facilitated each other pretty well.
So back to the same place. So this is a perfect time for some questions. Okay, we've got 3 here from at Chop Saki. So we're just gonna blast through these while I run through this again. Were the number of joint limits on PS2 difficult to work with?
Yes, everything was difficult to work with. There wasn't. I don't know if there was anything that was not difficult. The joints were few and far between. I mean, we were one of the biggest issues we had was because we were so keyframe heavy and we're so pose heavy because we're all 2D guys and we want to have these beautiful poses. There was so much interp happening because we couldn't always key a lot. So we had to actually pose and let the interp look the best. So we had these techniques where we would pose, and our poses that we would sometimes do looked awful, but the interp looked great. So, and we knew the interp was kind of chewing up most of the time on screen, so we just animated for the interp. So we were kind of animating for what you ended up seeing most. Again, limitations that we just had to constantly be working around and working through, but we kind of didn't let anything stop us, and we didn't have any rules. You know, one thing about the team in general, they hold my risk is we didn't look at a lot of games and we didn't say we wanted to be like anybody. We didn't test it. We were like, we knew we wanted a good experience and we knew we wanted good visuals. So then we just tackled that one step at a time, and we didn't let kind of the current rules or trends affect us. Yeah. If anything, if somebody wasn't doing something, and it's my natural instinct, if someone's not doing it because they say you can't, I'm always like, wow, we should totally try that. Yeah. Because nobody's doing it and they say we can't. And it's not always good, but sometimes leads to like weird things like this game.
Yeah.
And the game's kind of strange for its time, anyways.
Yeah. No, it's what makes it special. All right. So the next one from him is: are there any animations or mechanics that you really, really wanted, but you weren't able to ship them, and why?
There was one thing that we couldn't ship because we couldn't get to it and we couldn't figure it out, but we always promised that we'd get to it later, and he was going to have a horse. It would have been a big deal for us because this combat system that you see on the ground, I had big old plans and all these I had all these notes about how it was all going to happen on the back of a horse, so that you could select multiple characters and jump and fight off of horses. And we just never got to it. We just ran out of time. So unfortunately, that's one element that I wish we could have hit, but we never hit it. So.
And this is kind of out of the scope of this game, but you had a sequel. Did that come up in the sequel of saying, let's do this?
It did. It totally did. But again, because that sequel took on, we tackled another huge thing in the sequel, not thinking that it was going to affect the horse idea, was that we actually had a buddy. And our buddy AI was originally going to be, believe it or not, multiplayer, so it was going to be 2 people playing it. And online play is what I meant to say. It was supposed to be all online, and it was really new days for online back then for a game like this. That took so much dev time, we never got to the horse. You can see there that all our blocks were automatic, so you could just hold block, and it doesn't do anything. But the mini game here is how do you get out of this if everybody starts attacking? And all these guys are like so meticulously timed. I mean, you can't totally tell, but they're really waiting for you to do something, and then they make new decisions based on what you do. It's really a complex system for what it was doing back then. People didn't totally realize it, but it was doing a lot. And you're watching some bugs that we actually left in. Originally, the enemies weren't supposed to cross in front of the path of the player to get to the other side of their surrounding patterns. But we saw that they were doing it, and it really added for an erratic feel, so we left it in. We just let them run across the play field, get to their new positions, and it just kind of adds to the crazy feel. The camera work here, as you can see it kind of moving around and going in and out. This is the Desperado inspiration that there's a fight in that movie where they're fighting in this like pin, like I don't know what it is, like a pig pin or something. And there's a steady cam moment, and I guess Robert Rodriguez is just running this steady cam around. And that was, to me, that was like the most inspirational kind of get you in the moment camera work at the time. And I thought, man, I gotta bring that to games. Games usually just plop that camera out and they just kind of back out so you can get everybody in view. And I was like, no, we've got to have better ways. So our camera was actually pretty smart. It would come down, start doing these moves, but it was totally aware of where the enemies are standing. So it would try to make decisions and like fit them into shot if they were actually a problem. They even had priorities and stuff. But it was a little buggy here and there just because we were trying to pull off a lot for what was happening at the time anyways. But it worked out for what it was.
All right, we're getting so many questions. This is great. How did you keep the walk cycle from looking repetitive? This is from at Niels Dinkelauer.
Wow. Well, I think the walk cycle, so that's one of my animations. So I'm going to tell you that looks totally repetitive. Because I didn't have anything, I couldn't do anything about it. We had a cycle and nothing else. So not a lot of layers, and I didn't have fancy state machines at the time. So what we ended up doing was I just animated a walk cycle and hoped that it didn't look too bad. Just truly, that's all it was. And I think it's super repetitive.
Yeah. I think what is interesting though is I need to get rid of these guys so that we can kind of look at it a little bit. I mean, the fact that I think you've got that feeling of different. It's not a linear like forward velocity on the run.
No.
You kind of have this ebb and flow to it that I think gives it weight that certainly at the time wasn't probably very traditional, and even now doesn't seem to be as common.
No, you know what's funny? All the animators, if they're watching this, they know what I'm about to say. I used to always kind of preach that some of the beauty of animation doesn't come from how perfect the animation is. It comes from more like the animator's touch, the animator's hand on it. So when things got a little too perfect, I always thought it lost a little bit of something. So I kind of pushed the animators to just kind of stop being so perfect, let stuff kind of happen. It's kind of a 2D approach where you just kind of like loosen up and you just kind of rush something in and you just kind of hard it out and you hope that it's going to work. And you're just dealing with emotion, timing, and just feel. And that's how I kind of press these guys to work. So what you end up, and and you'll see it all over the game, you'll have animations that we weren't so concerned with whether or not the cycles were perfect, because we hated that feel. We were more concerned with, is the timing right? Is there rhythm? Because the rhythm was so appealing. The whole combat system was based around kind of continuing this kind of rhythm that the player could kind of find and then progressively keep the rhythm going. And all that was done by some strict kind of timing controls that I would press on the animators to make sure that, the rhythm feels good here, it doesn't feel good there. And then we would work around, whether or not it felt good and whether or not the timing looked good. But truly selecting characters and having the camera go free allowed us the freedom to really control the rhythm of the game. And the rhythm was key for appeal in this particular case. And on all animation, honestly, but and it's funny, some of the bigger mistakes we made, and we made plenty, were in just not being able to polish it to the point where we wish we could have back then. But luckily, some of the things that weren't polished and some of the systems that were kind of breaking and a little buggy would break the rhythm. And some of those breaks helped tell the player kind of what to do right and what they were doing wrong. So as long as we mitigated, okay, this still feels right and the player's doing the right thing, we would leave it in. If it felt wrong but the player was doing the right thing, we would try to hit those bugs, but not the others. So we were just being really crafty about what we took care of and what we couldn't hit. It's pretty funny to look at it. It's pretty complex blocking for those days. We had I think 8 direction blocks, but it was super important because blocking was automatic. Who wants to block? I didn't want to make that a test. The test was actually whether or not you could time your attacks and juggle, 7 people, not whether or not you could block a single attack. So.
Yeah. All right, let's get to the next question real quick. From Shush Ajima, Mark of Kri was a huge influence for me. Were you also involved on Rise of the Kasai? I always dug the Tati pained attack anims.
Yeah, well, absolutely was. I was, again, animation lead on that one and kind of held the same responsibilities, combat design, cinematics, and Tati was one of the characters I animated as well. So, yeah, it was a great game. Actually, at the time, didn't get a lot of press, and I think it had some great stuff, but it was definitely a transition for us because we actually were changing as a studio at the time. So.
All right, well, I try to stealth these guys. From A Bag of Candy, what were some of the benefits of working on a limited system? Did it force creative ideas or problem solving for the story, the gameplay, etc.?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Creative solutions was the key for this game. We were a small team with a lot of passion, and we had really high expectations for ourselves. All these things are terrible to have when you were working back then, because everything was in our way to get to all the things you wanted. So yeah, we had to be super clever and just cheat a lot of things. And it really made for some really creative choices. Obviously from the sketches, the storytelling, which we appreciate 2D so much, I just wanted to have drawings all the time because I think they tell a better story sometimes than some of the other settings. So yeah, absolutely. Helped out a lot, actually.
Awesome. All right, we've got another one here from Chop Soki. Were the cinematics all driven by narrative or other functions like streaming?
Like what?
Like streaming. Did you kind of use them to hide streaming, or was it all just for narrative purposes?
It was actually a combination of two things. It was narrative. Actually, I think it was all narrative because there was two types of narration. There was the narrative that Kuzo was telling you, which is the bird. The bird is the spirit guide. He tells this real high-level story, and then there's another narrative that is not told by the bird, that's told by another voice or other voices, and those are actually more informative. They're more gameplay related. So again, really narrative, but at the end of the day, most of our answers always came from: are we telling the right story? Are we telling the right story both narratively? Are we telling the right story when the hand reaches for the sword? Did that reach fast enough? Am I telling the story that the hand doesn't weigh a lot? Or am I telling the story that the hand, that he's really strong? I mean, those are like the questions that ran through our brains. And that's just us kind of approaching it from this really kind of meticulous.
That feels like a very sort of like traditional like film performance mindset, right? And
yeah, totally.
Secondary to your gameplay becomes a little bit secondary.
A little bit. That it's not totally
how
true.
They feed into each other, right?
Yeah, this is the weird hybrid that I was saying that I was kind of the hybrid role at the studio where my background's film. I studied film. I was going to be a feature animator, 2D animator. You know, I did some 2D and then got sucked into video games accidentally. And so I brought the feature film aesthetic and desire to the game. But I love games. I was a huge Mortal Kombat fan, in particular Mortal Kombat 2. And believe it or not, this is all Mortal Kombat in this game. I used everything I loved about Mortal Kombat and I put it in here. Mortal Kombat 2 is like a strategy game to me. It's a chess match, and it's all about timing, spatial relationships, placement. This is exactly all that. I was super concerned with spatial relationships, timing, rhythm, and whether or not you can make the connection. For me, it was a day-to-day thing. I mean, this was Mortal Kombat, and it wasn't really on the violent. The violent was just it's kind of a topper. It's the reward because you did something right, but not necessarily the Mortal Kombat aspects that I'm talking about. I just liked more the kind of chess match where, okay, did you get the timing right? Did you get the spacing right? Did you choose enough guys? Did you not choose enough guys? Which combo branch did you use for this particular scenario? Or should you not have done a combo? Should you have gone in and stealthed? I mean, it's so chess match, and it's very Mortal Kombat, especially Mortal Kombat 2 for me, which was my kind of the top of the Mortal Kombats. It's just weird to say when you're watching this because it doesn't really look like Mortal Kombat, except for the violence, I suppose.
All right, so we've got a question here from at Niels Dinkelaar. With all you know now, what would you do differently if you did these animations again?
You're asking the wrong person. I would just redo them all regardless. I don't know. This is just, I don't know. I can't even, I would do them all different, but not for a different reason. I would just try them again. I think reasoning for us, we were always kind of thinking a lot. There was a lot of, personality. It's a lot of storytelling. It was the execution was really gated by whether or not we made our deadlines. So just having more iteration time would have been awesome and more polish time. But honestly, with some of the systems we were working with, no matter how much polish we added, you still would have seen some of the glitches and pops and some of the not so pretty moments. So yeah, I don't know. I'd redo everything, but I'm an animator. What do you do?
I think, am I supposed to have him maybe look at that part?
Oh.
Maybe he's supposed to give us a little cinematic here.
Yeah.
All right, let me see what time we're at, because I want to also show off some of the other weapons that I have unlocked here than the arena, because the amount of weight and personality that it feels like you gave each weapon is also super amazing.
Yeah, the weapons were a big part of the game. We didn't have a lot of them. So we knew going in that they were going to have to stand up on their own visually, and they were going to have to stand up on their own on the design side. So it was actually pretty straightforward on the design side because the sword did less damage but was faster. The Taiaha did more damage, but not a lot, but it could take care of a lot of guys. And the axe was just ballistic, have fun. But it had a lot of downtime. It had a lot of kind of recovery times. So pretty simple in that respect. But since we didn't have a lot of variety, we were all about, okay, how do we sell the weight of this axe? And then once we got the weight right, it was the entire studio agreed, okay, people have to get cut in half. We just can't not cut people in half. Clearly you made it weigh a ton, so make it go. And then we just started severing bodies left and right, and I think that was the right choice, even though I'm sure marketing thought, what the hell, it's a Disney game, but people are being chopped in half. But it felt right.
Did that become a point where did they start to ask to push the violence and more to differentiate, to push away from the Disney aesthetic, or was it to pull the violence? Where do you feel like the balance came and where they were pushing you?
I think I wouldn't say they were pushing. Is more about kind of questioning, and it was questioning because back then I don't think a lot of people were actually mixing the two worlds together. The kind of Disney animation and the adult kind of violence. Those two things were always kind of separate. I'm an animator. I grew up, learned, and been taught and study animation. So studying as much animation from around the world as much as I've studied American animation, I feel that's totally an American thing. Around the world, violence isn't kept from animation at all. So we went into this going, yeah, animation is just animation. It's just the way we're going to tell you the story, but it doesn't necessarily need to limit subject matter. So we were totally just, trying to sell it as an appeal thing. we're big time 2D animators when we got into video games, and I'm a huge fan of this gentleman named Mark Davis, who's an old Disney animator, and he's kind of my influence. And learning his work and then kind of moving into games kind of brought this aesthetic and the desire of just making things appealing and not caring so much about, whether or not that's a cartoon or not. It's just appeal. It's just shapes. It's just designed shapes. And I knew that appeal is appeal. It doesn't matter what the subject matter is. You can make it fun.
Yeah. Come on, Coach. I'm going to see if I can get just a little bit further, and then we'll go to the arena to show off those other weapons. Let's see. From Mooch Ashka, what were your favorite things that your tech artist provided you on this project? And we're tech artists. Tech artist is a bit of a newer role in sort of generation. So who kind of handled what would be traditional tech artist roles now?
Sure. Well, I know back then, we started the game with, not a lot of tech. We were kind of a bunch of 2D guys wandering around trying to figure out how to pull this stuff off. We could probably keyframe our way through anything, but some of the problems we were really running into revolved around how the hell are we going to pull off some of these visuals. We were lucky enough to have Billy Harper in our team. Billy Harper, at the time, back in Sony, was this great technical animator that we had hired, who actually saw a lot of the stuff we were starting to try to do and was just floored and very helpful at levels that I can't explain now, because he ended up being the first guy to actually allow us to do things like kind of let go of the sword. Back then it was pretty rare or not even heard of if you could actually let go of the sword from your hand. Yeah. So we had to come up with ways to be able to flip the sword, stab it in the ground, walk away from the sword, and then kind of pick it up again. We didn't have a lot of physics or anything like that. So he was kind of spearheading rigging and anything and everything to kind of help us get the character to the way it kind of looks. He's super crucial in the early days of this game.
We're gonna save it just to be safe, and then we're gonna go. Let's go back to the arena and show off. Oh, what are buttons? Okay.
I think it's fair to say that a game like this had freedom because of guys like Jonathan Beard and other and our producer guys that were at Sony at the time that were kind of heading up the studio, but were really open to having us explore and experiment. So those guys were super crucial. And I'd have to say vital to getting this to actually hit the stores, or else it would have been probably canceled early on.
Yeah.
But luckily, and if not too many people probably are going to know this, currently I'm at Amazon, and but there is a core group of the Mark of Kri. We've reunited, and we are at the Amazon San Diego studio. So I don't know what we're working on. I can't tell you, but hopefully that means something, and we'll make something cool there.
It means something to me right now. That's huge. Yeah.
So we'll see how it goes.
All right. While I get this set up, we've got another question here from at Chop So Key. Do you feel the meticulous approach to animations here scale as well to modern production with more animations and complexity?
I totally think they do. I've made a couple of games since this. This isn't the only game I worked on. I've kind of had the same approach, and the games seem to have benefited from it. Or at least I feel they did. Whether or not they resonate to the audience, I hope they did. But I think there's games out there that do this all over the place. I think guys are putting all kinds of attention to detail, and I know we did in the past. I think I've actually put just as much thought and some of the more major ideas in this I put into Tomb Raider, which I made recently, and that whether or not there you can see the relationship. I think there was a lot of the same approach to some of that work.
Yeah. That move is ridiculous. It's awesome.
It is. You know what's funny about that move is that we all knew it was ridiculous going in, and there was a lot of ridiculous things that the only reason why they worked is because we had this one designer. His name was Dan Mueller. Dan, if you're out there, who used to always put me into a position where he was like, I would love to see this thing, and they were always ridiculous, and they always sounded terrible. And I would always tell him no. Okay, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And then I would go back to my desk and be like, but maybe I could figure this out. I might be able to make that look cool, even though it's absolutely ridiculous and nobody would ever do that. And truly, a lot of the moves came from his ridiculous ideas and me just trying to figure out a way to actually sell it. And a lot of it was faked, and a lot of it was like, animation fudgery. Yeah.
All right, so let's get a few of these guys and see them. Let's see all the fun.
Come on. So ridiculous.
Yeah.
I love it. It reminds me of the old development days. That's great.
Should do one. Let me get out of this. I'm gonna ask another question while I get out of this and have the AI actually swarm me so you can appreciate how ridiculous the axe gets. A Bag of Candy asks, do you feel that the bigger games are getting that size is taking away from story or gameplay?
No, I don't. I think some of the games out there are just doing an amazing job of being able to juggle actually all that. It's more complex, right? It's a lot more work. It's a lot more detailed. I think it's more difficult to be wearing so many hats like I did back then when we made this, just because there's so much work to be done. But I think people are doing a great job. I think if anything, even with a lot of the new technologies kind of hitting the ground, I'm more interested in the creative solutions moving forward because I think the problems are getting bigger. I'm working with mocap now, just like most people probably do, but I do a lot of heavy keyframing with my mocap. I haven't lost that aspect of it. And things like, machine learning, all that stuff is super interesting to me, and I'm like, chasing that just like I think other people to solve problems. And probably the most interesting thing to me about mocap and machine learning is how can I influence that stuff? Like, how can I put my fingerprint on it as an artist, especially as an animation artist? I think, capturing real world motion is awesome, but I also think that having animators be artists and allowing them to kind of tweak motions is key. So I want to tackle that badly. It sounds like a great thing to kind of go at. Jesus, who doesn't love, being able to recognize certain animators' actions, from animations.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember seeing these things for the first time. Like you said, I think it's hard to really convey having not seen stuff like this in a game before,
Right.
and not expecting it either because of the general expectations of this art style, especially in like Western culture, that like this stuff would happen, and it was just like totally kind of knocks you out of the expectations. And for us, just in school, like myself and Jaleel and all, we would just sit here and just pour over this and be like, I can't believe that this is actually possible now.
Honestly, I'm so glad that we didn't actually stop to think about whether or not it was possible, because it probably shouldn't have been.
Yeah.
But we were so crafty we still kind of got it done somehow. I'm not quite sure how.
One of the other things that I forgot to bring the game box, but one of my favorite bits is that in the instruction booklet, you guys have a flip book.
Yeah, that's actually again Jeff Merkart. He is a 2D animator at heart, and he would draw all the concepts and kind of do all the. He was the guy behind the style, but man, and he constantly was making some animations. And flipbook animations, that is, 2D animations. And he was doing so many around the office that we were like, okay, we got to start putting these in the actual manual. So I think people are going to enjoy some of his 2D work. Whereas, I think a lot of the 2D artists that were working on this were so busy, working on the animations, they couldn't stop to actually do some 2D animation. So we were just in love with the fact that he could still kind of put that feeling into this. You're trying to impale, I know you are.
I'm working on it.
Kitty, do you do that? You're gonna be awesome.
I probably got to look up the move list. Remember which one it's called? Is it the?
It's got to be the bigger. Yeah.
The bottom one, the Fua Toko.
see if you can do it. I think that was there's a move in here with this Taiha that was questioned around the studio for a while because I may have overstepped some boundaries, and it impales the guy. You kind of lift him up, and it goes sliding down the actual stick. And that was one of the first animations I think I ever did where people were kind of looking at me like, you know what, maybe you shouldn't have done that. And some people were a little upset over it. Yeah. It ended up shipping, which is great, but it was kind of violent for the time.
Yeah. So something that I remember, you had, my first job, we were talking about the other night, that you had come in for like a week and had sort of done like an animation tutorial because I was like the only animator at the studio.
Yeah.
And the thing that you told me about synced actions that's kind of always stuck with me and was the idea of in these synced actions thinking of who's the star and who's the supporting actor.
Absolutely.
And how if you were looking for what was it? If you're looking for humor or empathy to make the supporting actor or the enemy, the victim, the star.
Yes.
And if you're looking for just power to make the player the star.
Yeah.
Is that still a thing? Have you kind of evolved that thinking in 12 years now, or?
No, actually, it shows how stubborn I am. No, I haven't. That's still exactly the same. It's if anything, in most animation, and people know this, one of the bigger problems I've had, and I think a lot of people have when you're animating, is not to, especially when you're animating with two characters, is not to kind of steal the stage from the other character. So you kind of have to have a high level understanding of who's doing what when, because I think if two actors are going to town at the exact same time, it's hard to look at it. It's hard to watch where the action is. It's hard to control the viewer's eye. So no, that's totally still there, and I totally still believe in that. I think it's important.
All right, so I think we've got maybe just another minute or two. So if we have any more questions, make sure we get those in now, because then we'll be moving on. Is there anything that we haven't shown yet that you feel like you remember you wanted to look at? You remember you want to talk about?
Well, you've kind of covered a lot. No, as did I. No, I think we've kind of hit on things, unless there's something you think I missed. It's fun to watch it after all these years.
Do you want to play it for a couple minutes?
Absolutely not. I do not want to play it. There's nothing I want to play about this. Just
right.
I'm too close to it.
I get it. All right. I really like the. I think. Let me see if I can get this started again. I want to watch one more of these levels, like one of those cinematics again, because I think those are really, really cool. Okay, what were from this is another one from A Bag of Candy. What were some of the biggest hurdles you had to clear during production?
With production, man, I would say, God, there were so many. We had a lot of issues, I think, with style in the contrast, of violence and the look. I think that was probably a big deal. I think people were trying to understand our aesthetic kind of desire coming from the 2D world, knowing that, 2D animation is just appeal. It's appeal design, and that can tell any story. Not everybody totally got that. People grew up with Disney films thinking they should be singing, and I don't believe that. I believe they could be singing, but they don't have to be singing. And that was a bit of a learning experience for everybody.
For years,
I think that might have been the biggest.
Beside the
Probably at the
bones,
time.
a noble warrior. He
Do
had
we have
become a
any
fine
more
swordsman, and his
questions
training
coming?
was now almost complete.
No, I think we're good.
But
All
why
right, man,
train
Eric, this
if he
is
was to stay
this
in
has
the
been
safety of
a
his home
pleasure,
forever?
man.
Oh, great. It's been awesome looking at this
restless.
game. It's been a long time,
time
and
to move on.
it
Time
reminds
to
me of a
take
lot
his
of things.
first step
Yeah,
into
no, I know
manhood.
how much it meant to me.
His
A bunch
muscles
of the other
yearn
animators in
for
here,
action.
obviously,
His
like people in the
heart
chat,
sought adventure.
are saying
His
like how much
soul
it meant to them.
craved
So
combat.
you made something special and amazing, and thank you, because this is great.
Awesome. No, thank you. It was awesome. Thanks.
All right, thanks everyone in the chat.
Thanks.